So we now have DNA confirmation that Wagner mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was in fact killed on that plane crash.
Hmm.
I want to get into a discussion about this because I'm reading that it could have been a land to air missile. It could have been explosions that were put on in wine boxes. What do you think happened? What is your opinion on this attack that took down this airplane?
Well, let's talk first about what it was not.
Okay.
It was not any kind of surface to air missile. United States Air Force Europe, they initially had some indications that some of the defense systems may have been alerting at that time, but they came back within 24, 36 hours and nope, it was not a surface to air missile. As far as a bomb on board, no, that didn't happen either because the fuselage was intact. You set a bomb off of any size on board a pressurized aircraft, which was at 30,000 feet, that thing's going to have a catastrophic destruction. Going to come apart in pieces, be scattered out all over the landscape. Well, that's not what happened. The wings came off. And you can see it clearly. I double checked this with a buddy of mine. He flew gunships in Vietnam and then B-52s. So he's an experienced Air Force officer, and he was pointing out that you could see as the fuselage was coming down, it was rotating slightly, and that would indicate that there was a partial wing on one side that was creating that aerodynamic effect, forcing that would turn the aircraft. But they found the wing was off, detached, and on the ground. So, a couple of possibilities. It was either sabotage, and from a sabotage standpoint, you come up with a list of suspects ranging from Russian military officers who lost friends when the Wagner Group and their failed mutiny shot down some Russian aircraft. So, some current Russian Air Force officers could have arranged it. The Ukrainians are a possibility, maybe some disgruntled people within Wagner itself. So that's the sabotage aspect. And then there's also the possibility it was just poor maintenance. You know, if those wings are not properly maintained, they can come apart. So it was either sabotage or an accident. Regardless, he's dead. It does not change a thing with respect to the war, because in the entire Wagner Group story fascinates me because of how much attention it attracts in the West. Where so many people are obsessed by Wagner and Prigozhin, and without taking time to understand, the Wagner Group was set up by Russian military intelligence, the GRU. That means it's an intelligence operation. It's not independent. It's not some private fundraising operation. It is directly tied to Russian military intelligence. In fact, the other guy, Uchkin is his name, who died on board that plane. He's what they had described as the actual military commander of Wagner. He is an active duty GRU officer. So let's not kid ourselves that this is some independent, or Prigozhin was just a wily entrepreneur snagging Russian government contracts. So once you put that into its proper context, you just realize Yevgeny Prigozhin, he was a front man, he was a message bearer, and he was being used by Russian intelligence to either distract Western attention, focus the West on certain things that Russia would prefer they'd focus on and ignore other things. I never took any of the reporting about Wagner and its activities at face value.
Okay. Another former CIA, Phil Giraldi,
Yeah, I
has
know
said,
Phil.
okay, you know him. So
Yeah.
he mentioned in an interview that he does not believe Vladimir Putin had anything to do with this attack on Prigozhin, this sabotage, this whatever it ultimately
Yeah.
ends up being. He said he could have taken him out 100 different ways. It didn't have to be public. It didn't have to be something that could have been filmed, and it certainly didn't have to have 10 people, 9 other people die in order to take out somebody. What are your thoughts? Any of this connected to Putin or the Kremlin, or is that just exactly where the Western media wanted us to look immediately?
That is part of the Western meme. The Western story about Putin is he's a murderer, he's a killer. So they ignore the fact that he's a lawyer. Now, some people would view that as an insult. Calling a guy a lawyer is like, oh, please, I'd rather be known as a pedophile, But when you look at, number one, the timing of it, Putin was commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Kursk, which marked a decisive victory over the Nazis, and they were really on their heels after that, and that took place in the summer of 1943. And so Putin was celebrating that, giving awards to soldiers. Also, the BRICS summit was underway with Foreign Minister Lavrov there representing Russia. So you have to ask the question, who does this benefit? The cui bono. Who derives benefit from this? It doesn't help Putin. I'm fascinated by those people say, "Oh, Putin's a murderer. He wanted to send a message." Well, if that was the actual Putin, the minute Yevgeny Prigozhin walked into his office, Putin could have pulled out a gun, blasted him in the head, filmed it, and said, "That's a message to anybody that messes with me." Okay, if he's sending messages, so he wasn't sending a message. Some said, "Oh, it was the GRU. This was an intelligence operation." Professional intelligence officers have one firm rule: you don't poop where you eat. Okay, you don't foul the area where you're working. If you're going to kill him in Africa. Kill him traveling from Africa to Russia. Don't kill him an hour and a half north of Moscow, because then when they're going to launch an investigation, and they're equivalent to the transportation safety, and so when you get that kind of police investigation, you might uncover some uncomfortable facts. So don't even create the opportunity for that if it is an intelligence operation. So I think Phil's exactly right. This was not a Putin operation. I come back to it was either sabotaged by people who had an ample reason to want to take out Yevgeny Prigozhin, or it may have just been a structural failure of the aircraft because the wings did detach. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah. I would think if this was going to be a false flag or something that Putin had done, he would have waited until the plane was maybe closer to Belarus or Ukraine, that corner, and then tried to blame it on Ukraine or something like that. But they had just barely come up to 30,000 feet, and then boom, the incident. It goes dark with communication and data transfer. So I did see today in Reuters that Prigozhin was buried in a small ceremony outside of St. Petersburg. So he is gone. He has been buried. As far as the Russia-Ukraine war goes, where do you see this heading? Obviously, the counteroffensive, with all the pressure and all the hype, it's failed. They've not taken back the territory they wanted. They've not collected the body count of Russian soldiers they wanted. Now it seems all the focus is on heading south and possibly trying to recapture Crimea. But where do you see this conflict heading?
Oh my goodness! I mean, this is, really, this would be funny were it not so tragic because of the numbers of Ukrainian soldiers that are being killed and maimed in the course of this war. And they're really being encouraged to do it by Western political and military leaders. It's almost criminal from my point of view that this kind of military malpractice by the NATO generals and the whole cast of retired generals that go on television to exhort Ukraine to, greater sacrifice. It's real simple. You cannot attack a defended position unless you have air supremacy or at least equality in the air, where you can send forward combat aircraft, fixed wing, that can attack, bomb, the artillery emplacements, that can force the defenders to back off. So Ukraine doesn't have that. They do not have any kind of aircraft that can pose any kind of effective threat. Yeah, they can put up one or two, but they get shot down. So, and you can hear people, retired generals like this Ben Hodges. I mean, what a knucklehead. So this guy on the one hand said, oh, yeah, Ukraine's going to win. But then he starts talking about what the United States did in Iraq and how that's parallel to what's going on in Ukraine right now with Russia, which it is not, night and day difference. But Hodges acknowledges that one of the things that enabled the United States to sweep over a much inferior Iraqi military was air supremacy. And now he's turning around and asking the Ukrainians to attack what are well-defended, well-built entrenchments. And it includes not just trenches, dragon's teeth, these concrete pillars that are planted in the ground that prevent tanks from driving over them, pillboxes, firing emplacements where you've got interlocking fields of fire, barbed wire, the whole, and it's done in 3 layers. So they're sending the Ukrainians up against that, and it's just like a seawater crashing against a seawall. It hits and is gone. Some of us were talking about that at the outset, and we're on the record saying that this was not going to succeed. Well, yes, I was right, and Ben Hodges and Stan McChrystal and Phil Breedlove and David Petraeus, all these former 3- and 4-star officers, they were dead wrong. And, it's not like they just made a minor mistake. They failed to actually do some proper analysis of what's going on. And one other point, when those defensive lines that the Russians erected under General Surovikin, there are 3 lines of them. And they're scattered out over, I think, 40, 50 kilometers. And they extend 600 miles from right to left. So we're talking a very large area. When that was under construction, Ukraine had no ability to attack it. Because if they had, they would have. They didn't. Because why not attack the construction crews when they're building these things so that you cannot create the lines? You help yourself out. That didn't happen. So what we're saying is that the Ukrainians started off this counteroffensive with about 60,000 NATO trained troops, maximum. And at least 40 to 45,000 of them are estimated to be killed and wounded. That is a phenomenal number of casualties. And Ukraine does not have a ready reserve to replace.
Yeah. Sticking with the analysis of these former generals, General David Petraeus, he's pretty famous for being a good general, but do you think that either they're being lazy or purposely misleading the American people because of their CNN contracts to say what CNN needs them to say and what CNN needs as far as clicks and views? Because they bring these retired generals on that are on payroll to say certain things, and it gets big clicks, and they have all this honor from being, these top generals. But then most of their analysis, as you mentioned, has been very wrong.
Yeah.
Is their judgment clouded by the money coming in from these media contracts?
Yeah, I mean, if you had these guys on Bloomberg or CNBC or Fox Business doing stock picks, you'd be broke. You'd be bankrupt. That's how bad they are. Really, it's a combination of things. So, number one, most of them, or if not all, work in some form or fashion for defense contractors. So they've got a vested interest in selling a story that's going to bring more money into Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, down the list. But that's number one. But number two, how these guys got into the positions that they are. I was reminded of this. One of my buddies, a retired Navy SEAL commander, he said over the years that he worked with these people, the guys that get promoted up to this job, they don't normally get there because they're original thinkers, that they're good writers, or that they do their own analysis. Instead, they work in staff jobs where, they provide support to a guy up the line who then blesses them, makes them a golden boy. And then after that, they rely upon staff work. So people will bring in and say, here, General, here's option A, option B, option C. And all he has to do is choose A, B, or C. He doesn't have to think through if I choose A, what's that consequence? If I choose, they don't develop that level of critical thinking. And so once you've got our guys who are well credentialed, they get to trade on their prior experience as being, we were a 3 or 4 star general. And the 4 guys I wrote about, Stan McChrystal, Phil Breedlove, then David Petraeus, and then a former Ben Hodges. Those 4, none of them ever won a war. None of them ever fought in a combined arms environment against a peer foe. And yet here they are going in giving advice to Ukraine, who's doing something that none of them have ever done. And it's the same, the people that used to work for them that are now moving into positions of command, the same kind, same problem. I frankly, one of the exceptions to this has been General Cavoli, who's now the current commander of European Command. And to his credit, he acknowledged, hey, we're fighting something that we've never seen before, we've never experienced since maybe the end of World War II. So we need to really rethink and reconfigure what it is that we're doing.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that insight. Speaking of people that are lacking critical thinking, it's come out that President Joe Biden has been using multiple fake names or aliases and email addresses on the front cover of the Daily Mail today. It's been discovered that there's at least 5,400 emails of his fake name coming up in databases. These are the names that they can find. As a CIA person, if France or United Kingdom or Germany, if it was discovered that their leader was using all of these fake aliases to communicate and enrich their family, what would your analysis be? Or let's just go right to Joe Biden. Why would he need to have these fake names in order to cover up what he's doing?
Yeah, it's to hide criminal activity. Look, I come at this not just as a former CIA officer, but really my company, Berger Associates, for the last 25 years, we've done money laundering investigations. We were the ones who did a civil racketeering case against the major tobacco companies and major liquor companies for money laundering. So whenever you see something like, the use of this kind of alias, this is not for intelligence purposes. I mean, I used an alias, a pseudonym that I was given when I worked at CIA because I was undercover. Of course, with the name Larry Johnson, there are so many Larry Johnsons out there. Some people think I'm a 6'8" former power forward for the New York Knicks, known as Grandmama, or a Penn State, Kansas City Chiefs running back. So, there are lots of us Larry Johnsons out there. But the point in using an alias was to hide your true identity. Well, what Biden was engaging in with this, he wasn't trying to hide his identity for intelligence or policy purposes. He was trying to, throw the scent off, hoping that any investigator would be stupid and wouldn't figure it out. I think the real story here, though, Stephen, is the fact that this is leaking now. So in the past, the media has been pretty protective of Biden, and it's been like that scene. What was it from Police Story, where Leslie Nielsen sitting there saying, "Nothing to see here, folks," and bombs are going off, and mushroom clouds, and fires, and smokes, and body flying. Nothing to see here. Well, that's been the media up till now. The fact that now they're starting to put this information out, to me, tells me that I think an exit strategy is being planned for Joe Biden, that he's not going to be able to. I don't think he'll last through the fall, frankly.
Okay, so it's not that he's for security purposes.
No,
because most of it was about his family stuff, making money for his family businesses, communication with his drug addicted son. I mean, they've got to dig in. This just broke today on Daily Mail front page, 5,400 emails that they've found as of today. So, maybe next time we get on, we'll be talking about the content of that. But I wanted to get your feedback on that. Let's go back in the past to try to understand the president today and this current situation. It came out after President Kennedy's death that there was a lot of secret correspondence between himself and the then president of the USSR. Right. About how the United States and Russia could find ways to live in harmony, that they weren't really enemies, that to use a Judeo-Christian reference, they said the earth is an ark and the clean and the unclean lived on the same boat, right? We can do that too. Is there, I mean, that secret relationship probably saved the world from nuclear holocaust. Do you think that there's any kind of behind the scenes conversation happening between President Biden and Vladimir Putin that we're not aware of that might save us from future nuclear conflict? Or is that just off the table?
Yeah, I think that's off the table now. Part of it is a combination of Biden's mental dysfunction. And part of it is that the actions of the United States have rendered, any kind of dialogue almost impossible. And that's what's so dangerous about right now. In contrast, going back to the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 62, because they recognized we came to the precipice of a nuclear exchange, and we had to back away and find a way to live together. What I find, I had a conversation last night with one of my old high school buddies, and he has been inundated with all of the propaganda. So as we were talking, I said, well, Putin tried to, he wanted to join NATO. He goes, oh, no, he didn't. Where'd you hear that? So I had to pull up the references. I mean, you had the former head of NATO, a guy named Robertson out of the UK, talking about he had a direct conversation with Putin wanting to join NATO. And the West rebuffed Russia. Well, why? Well, if you eliminate Russia as an enemy, how do you justify an $850 billion defense budget? So there is a direct financial interest here in keeping this conflict going and provoking them. Instead of finding ways, because we've got lots of areas where Russia and the United States actually would agree. Apart from the fact that the United States relies upon Russia still for its uranium, the fact that Russia has been a critical supporter and enabler of the United States in getting back and forth from the International Space Station. So the cooperation on space activities has been very close. Russia stridently against terrorism. They fought an effective counterterrorism war against the Chechens, beat them, and now you've got members of the Chechen community that are stalwart members of the Russian military. They're some of the best fighters Russia has. So Russia has shown how to both confront terrorism, deal with an ethnic community, and make that ethnic community a strong part of their nation. That's something I think the United States would really benefit from learning. I think on a whole raft of issues, it would behoove the United States to work more closely with Russia. Yet the policymakers, the media, the propaganda that's so rampant in this country portrays Russia as this Stalinist empire waiting to capture the world, to take over the world. And you try to reason with people on this. They say, well, why did he invade Ukraine? So I start down the list. I said, well, you tell me why the United States invaded Grenada, Dominican Republic, Panama, Iraq twice, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Yemen. I mean, let's just go down the list. What, with the exception of Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, which is close to U.S. shores, all the U.S. military adventures have been well outside our territorial waters. Yet Russia is faced with a direct military threat on its border, and we can't see that. So, that it is that I don't know how we bridge that gap. I'm hoping that, through programs like this and this kind of discussion, we can start penetrating somewhat the consciousness of Americans to recognize Russia's not our enemy, and we don't need to be on the brink of a nuclear war with them. We share a lot more in common with Russia than we do in terms of differences.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I pointed out when I was on an interview with Colonel Tony Schaefer that within 1 week of 9/11, General Wesley Clark, he told this almost 20 years later, within 1 week of 9/11, he was called into the Pentagon and told to ready the troops that he was over as a general, that they were going to invade 7 countries. And he asked why, and they said, don't question us, just get your men ready, right? And we end up going into all of these different countries with no reasoning why. I talk to people that have fought and served honorably, loyally over in the Middle East. I ask them, why were you there? They say, we don't know. We don't know why we were there. We just were fulfilling orders. And so that's really interesting. This justification for nearly $1 trillion, we have to have an enemy or else that's just a waste of taxpayer money. Right. I never put 2 and 2 together. Thank you for helping. At least I don't know if anyone else will get anything out of this that watch this, but for me, that's really insightful. But before we move on, we talked about past generals being contracted with CNN. What about the current generals that we're hearing so much about? General Lloyd Austin, General Mark Milley, General Milley, he's going to be retiring soon. Is he setting himself up for a military industrial contract? Meanwhile, we know that Lloyd Austin came directly in from Raytheon, being at the top of Raytheon, and we just have this open revolving door where they go in and out. What are your thoughts on them? Is there any of their judgment clouded by serving 2 masters?
Totally clouded, and all we have to do is just look at the decisions they've made over the last 18 months with respect to this war in Ukraine, or what the Russians call a special military operation. They've been consistently wrong. They've given bad advice. And again, Lloyd Austin, when he was in the service, I know guys who served under him and worked for him. He was not a smart man. He was never known for being a smart guy. He was, let's be candid. He was an equal employment opportunity hire. He got hired because of his race, not because of his military genius. But it's not to say that he's the only, dumb one in the crowd. I mean, look at Mark Milley. I guess compared to Milley, Austin looks like Einstein, given some of the absurd things that Milley has said, and continues to insist that, Ukraine's winning. Ukraine is not winning, not by any objective measure. And the fact that Ukraine's ability to maintain military operations is entirely dependent on Western aid should at least give any military professional pause to say, hey, if we turn the spigot off on this end, they're not going to be able to continue to operate. You should at least be able to give some honest analysis out of that. So Austin and Milley, they're symptomatic of a broader disease that infests the Pentagon and our military and all services across all branches, Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy, Army. It's endemic and it's corrupt. So right now, if you're a young officer, you're not going to get promoted if you disagree with the boss. If you see the boss say something stupid and you dare to come up and contradict your boss, be it male or female, your career is over. So think about what kind of people that get promoted. So you don't get people who are willing to challenge authority, who are willing to take risks to deal with in pursuit of the truth. You get people who are the go along, get along groupthink crowd. And that puts you in just a terrible, terrible danger. And I think that's what we're beginning to witness in this country. We've got the most expensive military in the world, and it's terribly ineffective. And yet it can't look in the mirror and admit that, because to admit that it's ineffective, then it's going to raise questions. Where in the world did we spend $800 billion, and what did we get?